anybody has any awkward questions to ask, we'll give equally awkward answers. Roger.
Yes, Roger.
Yes, I remember the medallion from a couple of years ago in the workshop, and so I was fascinated by how it was sentient. Now, just sort of, I guess, if I had read as much as Jeff has read of the novel, I might have a clearer idea of how the medallion acquires its, well, it has a point of view. It sort of like depends upon the person who's wearing it. Is that the idea?
Sure. Well, I've read a lot of fantasy genre over my time, and point of view and the types of characters that are in there have always really intrigued me. And then I look at stories like Lord of the Rings, where you have an item that is of, basically the entire importance of the story. And I sort of asked, well, what would the ring think? And that's kind of where this happy little narrator came from. So in this case, the narrator himself, he's a water spirit who's been imprisoned in a medallion. And at least at the beginning of the novel, he has access to the thoughts of who's ever carrying him. So in effect, while he's the narrator of the entire story, like each of the protagonists kind of share narrative agency for any particular chapter, depending on who has the medallion at the time.
Okay.
Kara.
I have a question for Clint. I know that when you first came here, you were thinking that you were going to be writing humorous essays.
This is true.
And obviously there's still some humorous moments in what you're writing, but it seems like you've taken a different turn. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what made you veer more, or how you found your subject matter, I guess?
Yeah. Well, this, what I just read, that particular essay, was actually part of, I started that, I think my sophomore or junior year of my undergrad. And it was part of my graduate school application, and my father was very comical and very like, hey, how you doing, kind of hillbillyish. And I think in a lot of ways, I guess, if I tried to view him how an outsider saw him. And I thought that seemed funny, because he was this kind of drunk, comical guy. And then as the drafts progressed, I started to kind of pull back out and try to understand him. And I think that's really what I started to do with the rest of my stories. Rather than trying to make fun of my characters and my family members, I tried to understand them and gather more thoughts about them. And unfortunately, it just got really depressing and dark, And it's not that I don't like to write. I mean, I still write funny stuff on occasion, but I guess I just started, rather than trying to make fun of what I was doing and my family, and I just tried to better understand them, and it just kind of naturally progressed that way. And I think my writing got better, and I think it got stronger that way. And I'm not saying that I won't go back to humor and writing funny stuff at some point in time, but right now, these are things that just kind of have to come out. And I think there are a lot of things that I avoided for a long time.
It's related.
Okay, you and then you.
This is related to Kara's question. I think that writing memoir is often as much a process of self-discovery as it is about discovering, what your subject is or what you think about your subject. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering what you have learned about yourself while you were writing about your father.
I thought that if I started writing this, that I would start to understand why I feared growing up and becoming my dad so much, and why I have all this internal anxiety that my kids, I'm going to just screw them up, big time. And I think these are natural fears of a father, but they're really, really scary to me, to the point that I have trouble sleeping sometimes, and I get tightness in my chest, and then I drink a lot of soda, and I get heartburn, and things just go out of control. But genuine. And so I thought that I would have this discovery and that I would understand these fears and be able to overcome them. And honestly, it started to make me more fearful of them. And I think maybe I just need to work on it more, or keep working on this progress, and maybe I'll work through it. But right now, I don't have a great answer for you. But I know that I know that I've discovered that my fears are irrational. But I've discovered that they still won't go away, and I don't know what that means. And I've discovered that I hated my dad for a long time, and there are parts of, and I love my mother, but we're difficult, and there are other, and you've read some of them, some of the other guys have, that my mother, our relationship is challenging. It has been at times. It's better now than it was. And I've learned to have a lot of sympathy, empathy for them and their situation and the challenges that they went through, and understanding why my father acted the way he did and why my mother acted the way they did. And a lot of it was just their relationship and their personalities butting heads, and it just caused a really toxic situation for me and my brother. That's what I've discovered. I've discovered more about my family and their situation than I have about myself. Hopefully I'll discover more self-discovery as I progress.
Well, and this stuff is all really very personal, obviously, and I know we all have trouble letting our babies out into the world. So I'm just curious how it feels to be sharing this now with so many people and thinking about maybe publication and whatnot when it is really personal.
Well, that's a really good question, too, because during my first year reading was the first time I ever actually tried to read something serious, because usually I would read about, gosh, I don't know, poop. Yeah, there was a lot of poop. I read a lot about poop. There's an immediacy when you read in front of a group and they laugh, because it's like, that feels really good to you, and you're like, you're like, yes, there's an interaction going on there. And when you read something serious, everybody just kind of, and you have to oh, are they liking this? Are they enjoying it? And that's what I think in my head. And so the first time I read, on our first year reading, I read a piece about my father and my father-in-law, actually. And for some reason, I just about started crying. And it was about how I couldn't cry after my dad died, which was completely ironic. And I never read anything serious again for the next year and a half, because I'm like, I don't want to bawl in front of a group of people. Like there are people at my church that do that, and I don't know, it just kind of makes me anxious. So it was a long time before I was able to get up and start reading this serious stuff, and so, it's been very challenging, and very, I had to read things over and over again, and even just reading this one, there were times where I kind of paused and stuttered a little bit. Maybe you guys didn't notice, but I felt it. So it's been very challenging and I don't have as much anxiety about letting other people read it alone, but me telling them, there's just a certain form of confession that feels very intimate to me, and it's challenging to do. Yeah.
I have a question for Matt. It's not a perfectly formed question yet, but
It won't be a perfectly formed answer either.
I mean, all writers are creating a world. Even if it's very realistic fiction. But, it seems that a writer of speculative fiction has an even greater challenge, because you're creating a world that may be very, very, very different geographically or physically, and people, the characters. And so I'm just wondering, in the little bits that you read, I didn't notice a lot of description, and I just wondered, what is this world like? The names of the gods sound, Mayan or Aztec, but so what is this world like?
Sure. Well, yeah, the whole process of crafting a world for a speculative story, it's let's just say I'm really glad that I have years and years of being a geek to help push me in that direction, I guess. For this particular novel, it starts basically asking the question of, okay, you're right, take the Aztecs and the Mayans, and then say we change a few events in history. So Cortez, he tried to come to conquer, but he failed. And then the Industrial Revolution failed because, these new combined people had magic on their side, and they wanted to keep their things the way they are. And from there, I basically try and look at the two different cultures and find a way that I can blend them, and then I sort of ask, what would their world be like in modern day as we are approaching the Mayan end of the world? And that's kind of the center of where and when this novel is placed.
So is it set in Latin America, and what is Mexico now, or?
Yes, that's correct. Lindsay.
It sounds like you've got quite a monster of a novel going. Well, how did you organize and like deal with all the different plot elements and characters? Do you have a method that you use that you feel like is really spot on? Or?
Mostly it was Jeff leering at me and saying it needs to be done. That helped a lot. Really, when this story started, it was supposed to be a 90-page novella that kind of dipped into the story and said, hey, I'm here, I'm done. And now it is a 130-page Act 1, so it doesn't want to stop. I guess as far as the process goes, for me, I found outlining everything became very helpful. And I never was much of an outliner before. I am kind of a process writer, so I'll think about it for weeks and weeks and years and finally sit down and, write 50,000 words in a sitting, right, huh? Once, like with that kind of a process, it's free to go anywhere it wants. And man, does it want to go everywhere. Once I actually outlined it, though, it's almost just kind of like, here I've got, the mini example of the story, and I just need to put the meat on it. And I actually see that it could conceivably be finished soon.
This is for both of you. Yesterday, Melody and I were asked by a second-year student if we could articulate how we've developed as writers, and it was sort of a hard question to answer on the spur of the moment. And so I want to give you that opportunity with answering that question.
You go first.
You
got the mic.
We love you, Sarah. Well, man, how we developed. It's, I've grown with a lot of the faculty here for 1,000 years now. And, I would say that I learned a little bit, like little pieces from kind of everyone. And one of the things that I would always tell anyone whenever the question of writing came is Diana Joseph's idea that we're artists, so we have this idea in our head, and whatever we produce is never going to match that idea, so we need to attain that acceptable level of failure. And I tell every person that ever asks me that's what they have to do, that they have to realize they're going to fail to create what's in their head, but they have to get as close as they feel they can and then be done with it. And I never listened to that advice, ever. But as I'm standing here now, I'm becoming increasingly aware that I need to, and I see that there is the possibility that one day I will actually do that. Your turn.
Well, I've had a moment to formulate this in my mind. I cannot tell you how I have grown as a writer. It's come at like so many small steps and so many, I'll do 60 drafts of a story, an essay, and it happens in so many, it's not very linear, and it goes up and down. But I can tell you the two things that I did that I can say to myself, this really pushed my writing to a level that I started to feel like I was progressing. And the first thing was, I had my first semester here, when you were in there, I had a workshop with Dick Terrell, and I had a workshop with Diana Joseph. And both of them, well, Dick first read my story and said, you're not reflecting, and basically told me it was crap, And I didn't understand what reflection was, and I was like, he's just an old man, and he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's just this guy. And I got really frustrated with him, and I disliked him. And then Diana told me the same thing, And I was like, they're just stupid people, and I got really, really angry then. And then I thought, and then after, a semester over that winter break, it kind of started to sink in. And so I started trying to figure out what reflection was and how to do it. And one thing that did make it. So between that and then the second, so once I started to figure out what reflection was, I had to figure out how to do it. And so I started reading essays that I thought worked, and I started kind of reverse outlining them and going through them over and over again and underlining where I thought they were reflecting, and then I would like show them to other professors. Does this seem like reflection to you? Is that what this is? Okay, and then I understood what it was, and so then I had to try and figure out how to do it. And what and good thing Nate's here. I read the first essay in your wife's memoir, and reverse outline that, and that was what helped me publish my first essay, was taking her Stain You Red and reverse outlining it and then making it work. So it was just, I've always had good work ethic, I think, as a writer. I've always been able to sit down and spend that time in the chair and write. But I didn't always know what I was doing, so I still feel this way, that I'm just beating my head against the wall, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have felt that way. So doing those little side projects, those little things, well, this isn't working, my story's not working, let's find something that is, and figure out what they did. And that's when my writing started to take steps up, I feel.
Did you do a lot of research for that, or do you have a really fantastic memory?
For me?
Or you made, yeah, you.
Oh.
Make stuff up, or it's very detailed.
It is very detailed.
And it didn't happen yesterday.
No. How do I describe my process on that?
Yeah.
Usually when I start writing an essay, I just kind of go with it and write. And sometimes things I fill in gaps where I think there should be gaps filled in, just to make it work and make it come together. And then, in that essay particularly, I mean, I don't, how do I say this delicately? I don't worry about exactly what they said. I mean, unless it's something that really stands out, or exactly what they wore. I think of what they would wear, or what they could wear, and like my grandmother's kitchen, like that rotary phone, like I remember that I mean, how, that stands out, and those little things, and so little details like that, and so sometimes they end up, I guess, being an amalgamation of my memory, of me taking details and clothes and things that they would say, and I remember actions happening, and me compiling them into the essay to make sense of it. But whether or not this is exactly how it happened on that particular day, it's pretty freaking close.
Well, did you look at the genealogy that your grandmother did?
Yes, my brother actually has that.
Okay.
I did look at it, but I talked to him about it over the phone and confirmed my own memory. And I think I brought this up. There's another story that I thought about reading here, and you've heard the start of it at a writer's block, where my grandfather, I helped him castrate a cow, and the way I remembered it is kind of different than the way you actually castrate a cow, because I was like, gosh, I hope I'm getting this right after I wrote it, and I felt really good about it. So I looked up a video from Penn State of them castrating a cow, and then I watched it like 15 times, and was like, oh, yes, okay. And then now suddenly I can't decide if my memory and what I watched on the cow, I can't even tell what's different anymore. But yeah, I wanted it to be factual as best I can, and I know we castrated a cow, so I had to get those details, so it's more for the reader's sake. And I guess, whatever, I guess we call that fiction, and sure.
I've been realizing lately that people have different ways of remembering, and some people are really sensory oriented and other people aren't. Do you feel like you're really sensory, like you remember really sensory details about things?
I think that I like sensory details, and I think that they're necessary in a story. And I think that you have to put them in there. And so I don't know, I don't have a problem with saying I'm pretty sure this is how the room looked, or I'm pretty sure this is what it smelled like, or maybe my dad didn't smell like that at that moment, but it's really close. And there are certain things that, like, I remember him, I can remember him in high school really well. I can remember that. There are moments in that I can remember very, very well. And him urinating on the street, that wasn't a hard scene to write. So, yeah, I guess I do. I remember sensory details. I think I start with the story, I remember the story the most, and it ends up just kind of being an anecdote. And it's like a skeleton, and then I start putting meat on it.
So, Clint, this is for you, but you can also answer Matt, and I'm going to keep you on the spot. First, I just wanted to say, seeing your work from the beginning, I'm really impressed with both of what you've accomplished. It's amazing.
Thanks. Same to you, Leah.
I know we've got kind of a thing, but we're friends. Anyway.
That could be interpreted a lot of ways, but please keep talking.
It's a semester, I don't know. But anyway, I was going to ask you, when you structured your memoir, you mentioned some essays, and I missed the first part, because I'm never late with this one time. I just haven't missed it. So I'm wondering, how did you determine which essays to put where? Was it strictly chronological, or did you try to do like an arc, more take, say, a 3-act structure? How did you decide that? Or just kind of
I haven't yet. I'm like still trying to figure that out. I know that I'm trying to take it as linear as. This is one thing that I've learned with my essays is that if I just tell it in a linear chronology, it tends to just have a natural arc. For me anyways, and so that's good, and so I'm like, well, maybe that'll work for the whole memoir, but I don't know, like, as I've been reading through this thing and, like, trying to look at it as a whole, it's been hell. Like, I just cannot figure out how it's going to come together, and so, you know, I mean, I'm close, I mean, as far as word count, I'm pretty close to being done for the thesis, but whether I'm going to use all of those words, I don't know, and whether or not I'm going to use all those essays, I don't know, but I would say that it does begin when I'm pretty young, and then there is like a brief flashback, and then everything else just kind of moves. But you know, the essays themselves sometimes overlap and jump and come back and forth. I don't know how it's going to come. I can't really answer that until I maybe finish it. And I've seen it done a million different ways. I've read enough memoirs and enough essay collections. So, but when I figure it out, or if you figure it out.
Well, it seems thematically linked enough that it should be.
You'd think.
Well,
Yeah.
I have no doubt that you'll do it and it'll be great. So.
Bless you.
And Matt, for you, just you mentioned multiple protagonists. How did you decide? Did you just go chronologically then and just throw in the characters that you felt like best representing that time?
Well, to a degree. In my story, it's a very kind of typical quest genre. So you know, chronological is really the way it almost has to go. But because I have a narrator that has such an expansive memory and experience, you know, he very often will reflect on his more ancient past or something to that effect. As far as who controls any given chapter, really I haven't had to do much work with it because, I mean, the story kind of takes over and makes demands of me, and I just go, okay, whatever, do what you need to do. And fortunately, it's so far kind of worked out. Like, I know what kind of emotional crises that any given protagonist will have, and kind of when they're going to be capable of confronting some element of that. So really, the job that I have to do is, at that point, figure out a reason why they need to be holding the narrator. And I mean, really, I think in any kind of collection, it's the same kind of thing, even if they don't have to worry about a medallion who's talking to people.
Should we end it? Is that okay? Should we ask enough questions? Okay, because I mean, I know we're kind of like 10 minutes over where I thought, and I'm sure some of you guys have kids and some of you don't, but you got things to do. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. And if you're interested, we are going to go to Polly Eyes. That's how you say it, right?
Polly Eyes.
Polly Eyes for pizza for a little while. So if anyone is interested, by all means, come along.
If you need to look in the phone book for where it is, just look for Pagliilli's, and that's how you spell it.
But
Congratulations.